Hi, it's Craig Holm here from Unwind Property Rentals, and today we're talking about overcoming challenges to Airbnb. So many people who are now having their properties with short-term rental sites like Airbnb and others. It's interesting that the media only really ever comments on one and targets one, which is Airbnb, the biggest, but there are many others. Now, we have to understand that if you're going to be successful with Airbnb, and we're helping many people to do that, you have to be aware that there are moves within certain state governments to actually close the whole thing down. The worst culprits for this are the Western Australian and New South Wales government. When I tell a lot of people who have Airbnbs and short-term rentals Australia-wide that this is going on, I primarily get met with disbelief. Oh, Craig, that's not happening. I can't believe that, all this sort of thing. But it actually is happening. And it's this lack of awareness of what these governments are up to, state governments, which is going to cause a lot of pain for people who own short-term rentals unless people get aware of what's going on and start taking action in their areas to stop this insanity. Now, basically the essential problems are that we have governments here that are based on basically it's essentially Labor governments. This one here in Western Australia that has a bizarre sense of opposition to the whole sharing economy. So whether this is Airbnb or it is Uber, all this sort of thing. Now, what we got to understand is that these guys are not just yielding to the hotel lobbies. We're going to read this article. Call for Airbnb crackdown to target investors, holiday homes in Western Australia. We've got to understand what the motivation is behind this. They're not just listening to the hotel lobby and saying, oh, we're okay, we're going to listen to hotels and close down all short-term rentals now. No, they're doing this for ideological reasons. They can't have average mums and dads making extremely good money from the sharing economy. That is Airbnbs, the Ubers, all this type of thing, because it upsets the whole socialist mindset. And this is about private property here and people making money from their privately owned property. Now, let's just have a look at this article just to see what the ridiculous nonsense is saying here. Now, so WA's biggest tourism lobby group has called for a crackdown on Airbnb, pushing for a ban on the use of residential properties for tourist accommodation unless someone is living there. So starters, we've got to ask ourselves, what's wrong with the WA's biggest tourism lobby group? Something is really wrong with that group if it's opposing short-term rental. Airbnb has recently released figures about the amount of money that's being pumped into different states and also into country towns is astronomical. That's coming from Airbnb. For example, Nara in New South Wales, $15 million going into the pockets of the owners of 1,700 Airbnbs in that area. I myself just went for a drive through the Clare Valley, which is near the Barossa Valley now, and there's been an explosion in numbers of wineries out there. And for the wineries to continue, they've got to have an ongoing trade, and the trade and the impetus is being built through the whole Barossa Valley from Airbnb and other accommodation providers, not from hotels. There's virtually hardly any hotels around there anywhere. So now it's obviously the hotels and so on that are behind this, but who has said recently, who in the WA tourism lobby has recently advised the government that now Airbnb is allowing boutique hotels and so on to advertise on their sites? Now, we as a group, Unwind Property Rental, also help hotels and motels with their accommodation, and those that we are helping are reporting to us that in areas where we are promoting them, which are also big areas for Airbnb, the bigger Airbnb gets in their areas, the more actual business they are getting, because they're aligning their marketing with us. They're allowing us to do the marketing. So they're actually catching they're actually catching the benefit of all the increased tourism. When people go into an area, not everyone wants to stay in somebody's house. A lot of people prefer to stay in a motel or a hotel. If you're going to stay one night and you're driving through a town, it's far easier just to pull into a motel, for example. If you are a moneyed person and you've got plenty of money, you may prefer the idea of staying into a hotel. So what happens? Airbnb opens up tourism markets which are not actually even known in the rest of the world. Just speak to any European that's actually walking down an Australian beach. Recently, we did a video story of a guy from Switzerland who was walking on a beach in South Australia in Normanville in the middle of summer, and he was fishing off the jetty. And he was absolutely amazed at how beautiful that beach was through Normanville, Carricalinga, and Siankalula, all that area, how staggeringly beautiful it was, how fantastic the weather was, and how there was actually hardly anybody on that beach. He said, we've never even heard of these beaches over there in Europe. Now, I know what the reason for that is. They're finding out about all these places in Australia. Who's heard of Nowra in Europe? If you did a survey of 1,000 people in Europe and said, how many of you know about Nowra in Australia? You'd be lucky to have 10 out of 1,000 that would know about it. But because of Airbnb promoting these regions in Australia, including Margaret River in Western Australia, they are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into state economies. The Victorian economy had close to $400 million from Airbnb alone paid into the pockets of mortgage owners in that area. So we're now facing a crisis, really, in property prices dropping. This is putting people in danger of negative equity. Perth is an example of this. Property prices coming down because of the issues with the mining boom. That means a lot of people are facing negative equity. What does that mean? Well, they owe the bank more than what their house is worth. The money that they're receiving from Airbnb is helping them pay off the mortgage. Mr. Fat Cat politicians in the Western Australian government, your ideological opposition to this is going to hurt a lot of people in your state. Now, the Tourism Council in Western Australia told, this is the article continuing, told a parliamentary inquiry into short-term stay accommodation. Now, this is into short stay accommodation, which is what a lot of the tourists want. Now, the tourists are voting for this. They are requiring this, wanting this, demanding short-term accommodation. So if Western Australia does this, the tourists will simply go to South Australia. Thank you very much. I mean, how dumb can you get? How absolutely out of touch with reality can these Western Australian state politicians get? Listening to this garbage. Now, told a parliamentary inquiry into short stay accommodation and Airbnb and other similar websites were costing the state $300 million. Absolutely ridiculous nonsense in the extreme. I'm sure Airbnb will actually produce their results, and I'm very much looking forward to it, about how much money they just themselves are pumping into the Western Australian economy, including the whole Margaret River area, and it will be hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not costing the state. It is bringing into the state massive amounts of money. So the only statistics that Airbnb can give is the amount of money that the individual towns and areas and the whole state is receiving from Airbnb into the pockets of the Airbnb owners. That doesn't include the probably $1 billion or so that the state is actually benefiting from the expenditure of all those tourists. So let's say the figure comes out at around 300 million, which is what I would expect it to be, the amount that Airbnb has pumped into Western Australia last year. Then you have all those huge numbers of tourists spending money in the towns and wherever they're staying. They would be spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars each on going to events, going to wineries, going to restaurants, cafes. All that money is pumped back into the economy. So it's probably at least another $600 million on top of that the people who are staying in the Airbnb properties are actually spending on hotels, restaurants, cafes, and all this sort of thing. A recent article reported that the actual amount that Airbnb people were spending through the Murray Valley region, and I reported this from a previous article in one of my previous podcasts on this, you can see this, is $1.6 billion in the Murray Valley region alone spent by people who are staying in Airbnb properties through the whole region because there's huge numbers. That's a massive amount of money. That's keeping many of these country towns alive, which is what many of these politicians don't understand. And many people in rural areas, you need to start waking up to this really fast, because your town's being actually kept alive by Airbnb, whether you know it, don't know it, like it, don't like it. It's actually happening. You pull the plug on that, your country town's going to suffer big time. It's time to actually wake up to this. Now, so we're costing the state $300 million. When the reality is, it's more likely that the state is actually benefiting to the tune of close to $1 billion from Airbnb and short-term rental. That's how out of touch these people are. Now, it was criticized, labeled as an uneven playing field. So obviously, major and huge hotel groups are actually controlling this tourism, so-called tourism lobby group, speaking to completely out of touch politicians in the Western Australian government who are ideologically opposed to the sharing economy of Airbnb and Uber and so on. Now, Airbnb, along with some other websites, allow people to list part or all their properties for short-term accommodation. Well, of course they do. That's the boom. Now, before we go on, Airbnb is the reform to the industry. Many of these people start saying, oh, we've got to reform Airbnb. Sorry, Airbnb is the reform. You're not reforming the reform. You're trying to restrict the reform because tourism group, you're representing massive hotelier interests who are actually out of touch with the reality and don't realize that their own hotels will actually benefit from Airbnb. And now in America, boutique hotels can actually start advertising on the site. And also, that will happen in Australia soon as well. And it's also been proven that hotels do not actually lose out, but actually gain business because more tourists start coming into the area. Western Australia, in particular, probably more than any other state in Australia, vitally needs the tourist dollar because of the problem with the mining industry over there. And because of their reliance upon the mining industry, that's why the property prices have been going through such a horror fall and such a problem for everybody over there. Western Australia needs the tourist dollar more than any of the other states. Now, the Tourism Council Chief Executive called on the state government to crack down on Airbnb listings that did not serve as somebody's primary residence, a move that would target people whose investment or holiday properties were put on the site. So, in other words, now, this is appealing to the socialist mindset. Oh, we can't have people making money from the sharing economy. That upsets our whole agenda here of telling people they've got to be relying on the government for handouts. Hang on, this is private property here, and we can't have people using their private property to start making a lot of money. So the reality is there are people starting to make a lot of money on Airbnb. There are a lot of people making that are managing several Airbnbs and making extremely good money, which is now, number one, the main reason they're doing it is to pay off all the mortgages, get themselves out of debt. Just that is the number one reason. But others are making way more than that, so they're able to pay off a lot of other bills, excessive electricity bills and all this type of thing, school fees, maybe some funding themselves to go on some Airbnb holidays themselves in different parts of Australia. So now this is what they're saying. If someone is not a permanent resident of property, it should be let to a tenant. So in other words, stopping people from using their property as a short-term rental. Oh no, you can't do that. You've only got a permanent tenant in there, which would kill this. It would absolutely kill the whole tourism area, and it would mainly hurt rural towns, Margaret River, all the tourism areas outside of Perth will be hit hard with this, plus the beaches and beach suburbs are going to be hit really hard. Inner time property prices coming down in Perth, all kinds of problems with the economy there. This craziness is being suggested. Something isn't right here. Something is really wrong with this tourism group, and something is even bigger wrong with the Western Australian state government listening to this nonsense and of course agreeing with it ideologically. Now, the so-called Labor government there is supposed to be not siding with the big players against the small people. Here they are siding with massive hotel lobby groups against mum and dad who are trying to pay their mortgage. Absolutely outrageous. So this person said the listing of residential properties on Airbnb had done nothing to boost tourism. Absolute lie. Statistics from Airbnb itself absolutely prove it. That the Airbnb have releasing their statistics. There have been many articles showing exactly how much many country towns are earning, and it's always in the millions of dollars. Airbnb very open about the money. That's an outright lie. And even the smallest amount of research can show it. Many media articles showing millions of dollars going into country towns across Australia. Airbnb have been releasing the statistics mainly to the out of touch New South Wales fat cat bureaucrats in the state government there, because they've been proposing similar type of thing there just to prove that these arguments are absolute lies. Claiming it hurt traditional accommodation providers. So that's your hotel. So what hotels are talking about? The big hotels. Now, as I said previously, we are also helping hotels and motels with their accommodation and helping them to boost their accommodation and so on as well. And we find it's best done right alongside our overall promotion of short-term rentals, and it works extremely well. They benefit big time out of this and cost thousands of jobs. What a joke. There are tens of thousands of jobs being created by the hundreds of millions of dollars being pumped into the Western Australian economy. So that's just, it is incredible that people can believe this nonsense. rent. Properties listed on the site were often available more cheaply. Absolute nonsense. The motel price is pretty much similar to what you can get there. Absolute, completely ridiculous. Now, of course, if you're going to compare it to a $800 a night luxury room in a hotel, of course, it's going to be cheaper in many cases. But again, some people prefer that. And so this means that visitors are spending less money in Western Australia. Well, if they're spending $800 a night staying at the Intercontinental or some really outstanding hotel, yeah, great. But is that money going into the pockets of everyday Western Australians? The inquiry also heard from the tourism industry of Tasmania, which warned that the state's liberal approach to Airbnb regulation sparked a strong backlash from angry residents who put enormous pressure on rent and housing availability. Absolutely the most absurd comment ever, that Airbnb is creating any kind of pressure on rents and housing availability. That is just one of the silliest arguments ever. The housing availability is mainly determined by the availability of credit. The credit supply is happening unhindered, then housing, it will boom. And all of the recent situation has clearly illustrated that. And the current Royal Commission scrutiny on the practices of mortgage brokers doing unethical things with their applications has caused a credit squeeze. And this is what is actually affecting the housing industry right now. That's the reality of it. And now also that what we're talking about here, a backlash from angry residents. Now that can be solved by using a property management group like Unwind. We can manage your property for you. If you're thinking about getting into the short-term market, many people are. You don't want to be put off by this nonsense. Now, in particularly in South Australia and Victoria, we're not facing this type of insanity from our state governments. This is mainly coming from Western Australia and New South Wales. You don't want to be put off by this sort of nonsense. That if any government tried to do this, it would have such a serious effect upon the economy. They would have to reverse these type of decisions very, very quickly once the insanity was exposed. Now, so you don't need to allow this type of thing to be put you off entering into the short-term rental market. Now, okay, Craig, if that's the case, why are you telling us about it? Well, we want people to know the reality of what's going on. We need people to know the reality of the challenges. Most people that are running short-term rentals have no idea that this sort of thing is even happening, and then even deny it when I tell them about it. So we want to expose this. A part of the reason these sort of governments can get away with this is the average person running short-term rental doesn't express their viewpoint because they don't even know it's actually happening. So it's very important if you run an Airbnb that you get on the phone to your local councils, get on the phone to your local representative in state government and express your viewpoint very loudly. So, but if you're looking at getting into short-term rental, one of the things that gets these sort of, one of the things that actually provides a momentum for this type of thing is that people try and run their own Airbnbs. They occasionally have some unruly guests. It doesn't happen very often, maybe 1 in 100. Those people, it's usually young males having a party, upset the neighbours then can complain the next day to the council then complains to the state government, council, not even realising that this Airbnb industry is actually keeping them afloat and is actually keeping the country town they're in afloat as well. But complain to the state government hears this. So the simple solution to that is have a group like Unwind Property Management, Unwind Holidays, manage your property for you. We will then, through our system of concierges, manage the situation so that in most cases, we nip those type of things in the bud. We keep those type of opportunities for young males, get out of control, under control, so that doesn't happen, so the neighbors are not upset, and then you don't get complaints and so on about you. Now, there's quite a lot more in this article. We'll continue that in part 2 of this particular article. It needs to be exposed, and we'll be talking a lot more about this. If you'd like to have, if you've got a property and you're thinking it would be greatly suited to short-term rental, then we have the solution for you. There are many people doing this very successfully across Australia. Airbnb is a massive and growing trend. It is the only real positive trend in the entire property market right now, and it is growing at a phenomenal rate. In fact, Queensland Airbnb group doubled, in the last 18 months. We have that from another article also released in the media, which we've commented on as well. And so this is a massive growth industry. Whenever there's a massive growth industry, you always have a reaction, especially from fat cat politicians who don't want mum and dad getting ahead financially and so on. It challenges their ideology, and particularly the sharing economy is a massive challenge to the socialist ideological mindset. And that's why this sort of thing is happening. And it can be overcome. I mean, obviously Airbnb is here to stay. It doesn't matter how much these ridiculous fat cat politicians want to jump up and down about it. They're not going to get rid of Airbnb. It's a worldwide growing trend. It's not just Airbnb. There's 5 or 6 others. Plus there are groups like ours helping to manage everybody's Airbnb and other properties, so they don't have the stress of having to deal with a lot of issues. And so their overall outlook for the whole industry is positive. We wanted to bring up these challenges to highlight it so that people will actually have a voice, do something about it, understand what's going on there. All right, so if you'd like to find out anything more about this, you can contact me on 1300 541 777, and we would love to be able to help you set up and manage your Airbnb or short-term rental property. Thank you.